Good evening, everybody. My name is Elisheva Engler. I am the National Program Manager for the Jewish Fertility Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to our JFF National Surrogacy webinar. We are calling it our Surrogacy 101 seminar or webinar. We're very excited. Thank you so much for being here. We've put together a wonderful panel of experts in so many different ways. They bring really wonderful, unique perspective, and I'm very, very excited to introduce these amazing women. Just as a speaking first, we are going to, you are here as an attendee. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panel, please submit those. There is a Q&A function here on the bottom of your Zoom window. Please feel free to submit any questions there. Once we finish with the panel, after each one has spoken, we will have some time for Q&A. So please use that as a way for you to ask specific questions to one of the panelists or just a more general question. And that is going to be the best way to communicate any questions for them. So just a quick little thing about JFF. We are a national organization. We have 10 locations and our recently opened one in Nevada. And we are an organization that engages hopeful families to have babies. So we do that in 3 different ways. We provide financial assistance, and we do emotional support as well as educational content. So this is one of the webinars that we're offering. Like I said, it's a national webinar. So anyone in the United States, all of our educational and support services are free of charge. We offer national support groups, which you will hear about specifically for the folks that are underway in a surrogacy journey, and many other options as well. So we are very excited to have you here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Jessie Rubin. She is she's actually on our medical advisory board. We're very excited to have her here. So she's going to give us a little glimpse to what it's like from a medical perspective for folks going through a surrogacy journey.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. And my name is Dr. Jessie Rubin. I am a board certified fertility specialist, and I work at Reproductive Biology Associates in Atlanta, Georgia. And what I'm going to talk about for the next couple of minutes is just give an overview on surrogacy. Some people on this webinar might be very familiar with the topic, while for others, it might be brand new. So I just want to give a little overview, and we'll talk about Surrogacy 101, sort of what is it, who is it for, and what can you expect if you're going to go through a surrogacy journey. So as far as surrogacy is concerned, what it is surrogacy is the same thing as a gestational carrier when another woman carries a pregnancy for somebody else. And there's two types of surrogacy. One is called gestational surrogacy, and the other one is called traditional surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy is the one that most people are familiar with, and that's when the surrogate is carrying a pregnancy that was created with someone else's egg. Traditional surrogacy is surrogacy when the surrogate is actually using her own eggs, and this is something that very rarely is done, is not allowed in all states, and certainly is not allowed in most fertility clinics. So everything I talk about will be more of the gestational surrogacy process. There's really a wide variety of women and men that end up turning to surrogacy in order to build their families. And it's not always really for the same reasons. Sometimes it can be because a woman has problems with her uterus, and she either wasn't born with a uterus, or the uterus was with an abnormal shape, or some type of condition with the uterus where she can't carry a pregnancy. In other scenarios, women have certain medical conditions that are underlying where it's not safe for them to carry a pregnancy. Also, some women have had really bad obstetric histories where they had major complications with the pregnancy. And so surrogacy is recommended for future family building. Also, there are women that have had recurrent pregnancy loss where we recommend surrogacy. There are same-sex male couples that will use a surrogate in order to build their family. And also single men who desire biological parenthood will also turn to surrogacy. So there really is kind of a wide array of why somebody might be interested in this process. How the process works is it's pretty complex. There are complex medical screening, psychological testing, and legal framework that goes into it. And hopefully by the end of this talk, people will have a better understanding of all of those different aspects. As far as the medical screening goes, my role is really performing this screening and making sure that the surrogate is healthy, they don't have any major medical problems. Typically, it's a prerequisite to be a surrogate that you've already had one prior child and they were born full term and there was no major complications. And also that you haven't had any really bad pregnancy outcomes in the past and you don't have any major underlying medical problems, and that your weight is within a normal BMI criteria. Once somebody meets the screening, the next step is that their fertility physician will then review all of the medical records. We go through all of their obstetrical history in painful detail, page by page, looking at their delivery report, making sure that everything was smooth and there were no surprises. After that, I will bring a surrogate into my office for a meeting, and we go through their medical history as well, make sure nothing was missed in the records. And also we'll just talk through the process, make sure they know what the process entails, make sure everybody feels comfortable with it, and they know that there are hormones and medications and ultrasound procedures and blood work and all of that kind of gets tied into it. After that initial visit, if they're still on board, which hopefully they are, the next step would be doing medical screening with an ultrasound and some screening blood work. The ultrasound is looking to make sure that their uterus is a normal configuration and there's nothing abnormal with their uterine anatomy. The blood work is looking for infectious disease labs. So surrogates are screened for all types of different infectious disease labs, making sure that there's no infections that they carry that could be potentially passed on to the baby in the future.
In a couple of hours.
Okay. Also, if the surrogate has a sexually intimate partner, their partner would also need to go undergo the infectious disease lab testing as well. The same testing is also done for the intended parents. So everybody has the same infection testing, but it's just making sure that everybody's testing is negative so that it's as healthy of a pregnancy as possible. After that medical screening is completed, the next step is meeting with a reproductive counselor, which you guys will hear probably more about later. And that's a visit that's typically done with the surrogate by herself, the intended parents by themselves, and then a group visit together. And then the final step would be doing a legal contract. And once that legal contract is done, then we get to move on to the fun part, which is the embryo transfer, which is the part where hopefully the surrogate gets pregnant. The embryo transfer process does involve some hormones. So it involves hormones, typically forms of estrogen and progesterone, that help get the uterus ready for the pregnancy to implant and to improve the success rate with the embryo transfer. Typically, the surrogate and the intended parents stay with their fertility doctors until around 9 to 10 weeks of pregnancy, and then they'll graduate and they'll go on to their OB for their routine obstetrical care. It's definitely a complex process. There's lots of moving pieces involved. A lot of fertility clinics will recommend, and some require, that you use a surrogacy agency when you're going through this process, just because there are so many different elements that can come into play, and you want to make sure that nothing is missed on any of the testing or the screening. And it can be pretty complex. Certainly, there's often a lot of medical questions when you're going through surrogacy, but sometimes there can be ethical questions that come up as well. And so it's really important for both intended parents as well as surrogates to feel really comfortable with each other. You know, you're trusting this person to, do the most important thing, which is to have a baby for you and help you build your family. And there's a lot that really goes into that process. When I'm meeting with intended parents or meeting with surrogates, my first question is always, have you guys met each other? How did it feel? Does everybody feel comfortable? Do you feel like you have open communication? Because that's honestly really important. Typically, a lot of the what I call sticky points or kind of difficult conversations I try to bring up initially, and then they typically will come up in the reproductive counselor session as well. But a lot of these things are making sure the surrogate and intended parents are on the same page when it comes to vaccinations, when it comes to who's present in the delivery room, who's going to hold the baby, and also how they feel about abortion in cases where there's some type of medical problem with the baby. So while these can be really difficult conversations, I think it's important that there's open and honest communication because that really builds the framework for having a successful surrogacy journey. And that's just really, really important. One of the questions that always comes up, and I don't want to touch on it too much, but is cost and is this expensive? And unfortunately, the answer is for most people, yes. There are some people that have coverage for surrogacy, but to be honest, it's kind of few and far between from what I see in Atlanta at our clinic. So some people have coverage. I wish everybody had coverage, but it's something that a fertility clinic can help you navigate to see if you have coverage and kind of what that would look like. Also, it's dependent on whether the gestational carrier has coverage to be a surrogate, and that depends on their insurance as well. And that's one of the reasons why having an agency can just be really helpful because they help you navigate all of these things as you're going through. Something that I often get asked about a lot as well, it's really, really expensive. Can I just use a surrogate that lives in another country? And while that sounds like a really nice idea on some level, if it were to cost less money, most fertility clinics will not let you work with a surrogate that lives out of the country, only because the infectious disease lab rules are different. The rules on adoption and parenthood and who is the parent is different. And there have been cases where there were issues with people who used a surrogate who were international and then actually getting that baby back to the intended parents in the United States. So if you're thinking about using a surrogate that's international, I would recommend you first meet with an attorney to talk about it, but also check with your fertility clinic and see what their rules are regarding international surrogacy, because most fertility clinics in the US do not allow it. I do think, though, I've spent probably several minutes talking about all of the complexities and all of the screening and all of the things that kind of go into being a surrogate and being an intended parent. But the real takeaway message is it's feasible, it's doable, and it's a really beautiful and empowering process. And yes, it takes a lot of legwork, and no, it's not as much fun as getting pregnant on your own at home. It certainly is a lot more expensive and a lot more steps involved and a lot more doctor's visits and a lot more needles and all of those things. But when it is a good match between the surrogate and the intended parents, it can be just the absolute most incredible process. And so I think oftentimes when people are going through the surrogacy journey, it feels really discouraging. And you feel like, I'm really struggling having my family, and am I ever going to have a baby? And am I ever going to be able to kind of meet those dreams? And the answer is hopefully yes. And for a lot of people, surrogacy is a really magical and wonderful thing. And there's not one way to become a parent. There's lots of ways to become a parent. Surrogacy is just one of the options that we have. But, you choose what the right path is for you. And there's lots of creative ways to build your family. And it's not always what people envision or how they planned it to go. So certainly I see a lot of patients. I see probably one every week at least that's interested in surrogacy or is somewhere along the surrogacy journey. So I see a lot, but I think the message is that it's one of the options and it tends to work really well depending on why you're choosing to go down this route. And if you're going through this process, you're certainly not alone, while it can feel obviously very isolating. And it just has the power to be the most beautiful thing. I have seen it from the medical perspective for years and watched patients go through it. I surprisingly ended up having my kids through surrogacy as well. So it was not how I envisioned building my family. Just like for some of you guys, it's probably not how you envision building your family when you're younger. But I had the most incredible surrogacy journeys with our two surrogates. And I have these two wonderful little kiddos who remind me every day how wonderful science can be and how wonderful, other women are that can help you in this process and help you do something that you can't do. So I've seen it professionally. I see it every day personally, how wonderful it is. And hopefully you guys learn a lot today about the process, and hopefully we help demystify it and make it seem more approachable.
Dr. Rubin, thank you so much. I mean, you touched on so many different things. I mean, there is certainly not one way to become a parent. It's so true. And having your unique perspective of on the medical side first, and then you go home and you get to see it firsthand. It really is wonderful. And we at JFF, we've seen over the last, for sure, 6 months to year, probably definitely an increase in the interest and demand for folks that are going through surrogacy. And so we, embrace that and wanting to help as many people as possible. And so, one of the ways is by offering webinars such as this one, where we can really just give folks like yourselves some tools of what to do, how to approach it. And so thank you so much, Dr. Rubin, for all you had to say. I'm going to switch it over from the medical side to now a legal side. I'm very excited to introduce Rachel Lofspring. She is in Cincinnati. She is also professionally, she is a fertility law attorney. She also is a path board chair for JFF. And I'm very excited to introduce you to Rachel. Thank you for being here, Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. I think it's a really great kind of way of doing this to have the doctor first, because when we think about the timeline, you start with the doctor and you start with the mental health professional. And as Dr. Rubin said, you go through the screenings, you go through the mental health screening, and then you get to the attorney. And so we'll get to the attorney. So I'm Rachel Lofspring. I live in Cincinnati. I practice in Ohio. I practice in Illinois, and I practice in Kentucky now too. I have been part of hundreds and hundreds of surrogacies. My clients are intended parents, they're gestational carriers, also recipients of gametes and embryos, and donors of gametes and embryos. So I practice this exclusively all day, every day. So I'm going to start off and kind of provide an overview. So surrogacy law and also the law around embryo donation and gamete donation varies dramatically state by state. So none of this is legal advice. Attorneys love to say this, talk to an actual attorney, so you got it from me too. But it's really important because that law varies so much. It's very important that you have counsel that is in the jurisdiction, and jurisdiction just means state, where things are happening. What are the things? Where intended parents reside, where gestational carrier resides, where she's going to deliver, depending on jurisdiction, maybe where the clinic is. California loves to bring in a lot of other things too. So again, you want to talk to attorneys in different states to make sure that they can give you the right information that you need, and also that you like them. If you're working with a matching program, you want to be getting a list of attorneys, not necessarily like this is the person that you should be using, because this is the person who is going to be drafting the entire roadmap for your journey. And so when we think about different jurisdictions handle it in a different way. There could be law through statutory law. So this is like what the state house actually legislates. Illinois, where I practice, has a really great statute, and it basically says you need to do XYZ that equals surrogacy. You got to check the boxes. You got to make sure you have followed the statute, and then you can use that to enforce the agreement. And then actually there's an easier process on the back end for parentage. Other states like Ohio have case law, so not things that the state house writes, but something that has come up through the court system. And, we have a US Supreme Court. All the states also have like the highest court. In Ohio, that's called the Supreme Court in Ohio. And we have case law in Ohio that says it's not prohibited by public policy. So in Ohio, we get there, but in a different way. Kentucky has no law about gestational surrogacy at all. So it really just depends on where you are. And then a lot of it is practice, right? Like the attorneys have connections with the different entities within the states. They know the judges that you should go to, the judges that you maybe shouldn't go to. Not everybody gets it. Not everybody wants to get it. So we don't want to be working with those people. So it's really imperative that you find the right counsel and that you understand the system. Generally speaking, any surrogacy is going to start with the gestational carrier agreement. So Dr. Rubin gives her okay, the mental health professional gives his or her okay, then they come to legal. At that point, we get started on drafting the carrier agreement, and that is a negotiation. So I either get information from intended parents or we get information from the matching program, and we are drafting an agreement. The agreements tend to be between 30 and 35 pages. And it's really bringing together all the different parts. So everything from, reps and warranties. We are good people. We've never been convicted of anything. These are the doctors. This is the OB. This is the hospital. We talked about health insurance. What is the health insurance to cover the surrogate's pregnancy? So the intended parent's health insurance, that doesn't cover another person's pregnancy. So we need to look at her health insurance to see if there is actually coverage for surrogacy. So she might have pregnancy coverage, she should have pregnancy coverage, but it might have an exclusion for surrogacy. That is something that there are actually organizations out there that all they do is review those those health insurances. That's really vital. You don't want to have an oopsie with health insurance because that could get really expensive and it's a few $100s to review. So if anybody is getting started with surrogacy, you or your matching program should be asking for your surrogate's health insurance to get that reviewed so that am I going to have to get her health insurance? Because then we're maybe thinking about open enrollment. That happens in the fall to be put into place the first of the year. Do I need a gap policy? How else could I do this if that's not available? We are also pulling in things such as termination. We talked about that. So the parties have a discussion with a mental health professional. We make sure they're all on the same page. When it comes to termination, selective reduction, abortion is what I'm talking about. We draft that into the agreement. Now, that is going to depend on the jurisdiction law because in some states you can't get an abortion. So they would have to travel. So we draft that in, and we also need to have the understanding that a court might not uphold if somebody says, I will get a termination if the intended parents want me to, and then she changes her mind about that. I could not imagine, for example, a court in Ohio forcing a woman to get a termination. Now, not been tested, and why it's so important, that mental health piece, that everybody's on the same page, that we feel comfortable that even if the surrogate would not have made that decision for herself, if it was her child, it's not her child, and she could carry out the intended parents' wishes. So that's another conversation that we have. Certainly the COVID vaccine, which became this thing that was a gating issue. There's really not a ton of negotiation around that. People feel very strongly about what they are or aren't going to do on that. So people ought to be matched accordingly when they're going through the matching program. We are talking about base compensation and also expenses. So by base compensation, I mean, what is the surrogate going to earn for the pregnancy? And the way we generally handle that is through a schedule. So, she gets X amount. Let's say she gets $40,000. And I've seen a lot of ranges, and I've also seen a significant increase in this base compensation over the past few years. Also, base compensation can be very regional. What somebody gets in Ohio very well could differ from what somebody gets in California or Manhattan. Also, if your matching program is from California, you might have different packages than if your matching program is from the Midwest. There's a lot more pedicures when it comes from California. So we go through the base compensation and we lay out a schedule. So, she gets a certain amount of money when we have confirmation of fetal cardiac activity, and then we start every 4 weeks or every month doing a payment. We figure out, how far along in the pregnancy will she be before she will essentially get that no matter what. So, if the pregnancy goes to say 33 weeks, she's going to get the full amount. If it's less, she might not get the full amount because it wasn't as long as a pregnancy. It's always based on the pregnancy itself, never survival of the child. We do not base it on survival of a child. That's unethical. We can't pay for a child. So we're always watching for that. In addition to base comp, the other bucket of money that I think about are expenses. So the goal of intended parents is to make her whole. We don't want her to have to expend any money. So this includes things like lost wages. If she works outside of the home, we need to figure out, if she's on bed rest, when she's traveling potentially for embryo transfer, labor and delivery, she's hospitalized, after for recovery, what are her lost wages that the intended parents are going to need to pay to make her whole? If she's married or has a partner, same for that person, so that that person can travel, be with her, able to step in and take care of kids if she's on bed rest or after for recovery. Maternity clothes, childcare expenses, travel expenses. We generally have a monthly allowance to cover kind of like all the little things so that we just know like all incidentals fall into this bucket. We don't need to worry about it. And really each match is different because we want to make her whole. Her lost wages are what her lost wages are. Her childcare expenses are what her childcare expenses are. A lot of the times we'll also think about getting a loss of reproductive rider to an accidental death policy, or also we would get a life insurance policy. If something were to happen to the surrogate, this would provide money for her family. It also protects intended parents. It's not available in all states to say that they wouldn't sue for wrongful death. The surrogate's estate or family wouldn't sue for wrongful death, but we use that policy to protect intended parents on that as well. There's other insurances that people sometimes want to get. Sometimes they want to get like a short-term disability insurance if something were to happen to her. We're also looking into whether she has her own short-term disability insurance that can then be used to offset lost wages. So all of these pieces are pulled together in the agreement. I find a lot of the times that it's helpful to clients. There's just so much going on that we're able to get it in one document, so it's all right there. And then they have this roadmap. It explains rights and responsibilities. It tells us what we're going to do if this happens, what we're going to do if that happens. And it really gives us another opportunity to drill into the details. Sometimes people don't know each other. Sometimes there's not been a lot of conversations. This is really our opportunity to ask the hard questions and to get answers. I tell folks, better to find out now than once there's a pregnancy. So that's the contract phase. In every jurisdiction that I could think of, everybody's going through a contract phase. Once it's negotiated, and there can be several rounds of negotiation, intended parents need to have an attorney. Gestational carrier also needs to have an attorney. She does not have informed consent. She cannot give informed consent. She cannot understand the surrogacy if she does not also have an attorney. So both sides need to be represented by counsel. It is very much a negotiation. And then once everybody has approved the agreement, I circulate it for signature. I get signatures, and then I send the doctor what's called a letter of legal clearance that says they can move forward with embryo transfer. In those letters of legal clearance, I am telling the doctor that the parties have reviewed the agreement with counsel, they understand it, and then also this is the number of embryo transfers that the parties agreed to. I mean, generally it's a single embryo transfer. Usually we're hearing from the doctor because that's really a medical thing as opposed to a legal thing, if it's anything else. And then we also tell them that the date of the expiration of the agreement, it's generally a year or 18 months to get her pregnant, and then it extends out with the pregnancy. So that's the contract phase. The second phase, because now we get pregnant, the second phase is parentage. And this is where we get some differences between the jurisdictions. So in Ohio, and what we see in a lot of jurisdictions is you're going to court to get a court order declaring the intended parents the legal parents of the child. So we are putting teeth behind this negotiated agreement, and we are getting a judgment from a judge saying that intended parents are the parents and gestational carrier and her spouse or partner are not. When a woman delivers a child, we presume she's the mom. So we have to tell the court the story of why that's not the case, which is generally these intended parents contracted with the surrogate. Everybody knew what they were getting into. We used intended parents' embryo, and that was transferred into the uterus of the surrogate. The surrogate is now pregnant with the child, and she's going to deliver on this date at this place. Please give us a court order. And so the intended parents will have a document to sign, gestational carrier will have documents to sign, the fertility doctor will also have an affidavit to sign, all to tell the judge the story of this. If there is an embryo or gamete donor, we also handle that in the judgment as well, because we want to have a court order also saying that the donor is not a parent of the child. So in Ohio, we are able to get these pre-birth, which we love because then the intended parents are walking into the hospital with a court order with, when the baby's going to come that says they're the parents, they make all medical decisions for the child, baby is discharged to them, and then their names go on the birth certificate. Sometimes there's a little bit of confusion between like, what is a birth certificate? What is a birth order? Because they kind of sound similar. Birth certificate is the administrative paperwork that is generated after a baby is born. The birth order is what you're going to court to get. That is the thing that has legal teeth. So that's what we really want. And from that birth order, we are then getting the birth certificate that we need. That's the process in Ohio. It varies in other places. So for example, in Illinois, because we have this great statutory framework, we actually don't even have to go to court. If you follow the statute, then you are allowed to do this more administrative process. It's more streamlined. It's a little bit cheaper. Doesn't necessarily work for same-sex couples. They'll want to do another step. International intended parents likely are going to do something different. When I say international, so I have a lot of international clients that come to the United States to do surrogacy. It's much more regulated. We have laws about it. I don't do any surrogacy where like intended parents are leaving the country. So, and I think a lot of the people in my field where I practice are the same way. So that is the birth order. That's parental rights. I think that's my time.
I'm sure you can keep going and going and going and a lot, obviously a lot more, but thank you, Rachel, so much. That was really, really helpful. There's, again, just like there's so many different aspects of this journey. So I think it's super helpful having heard a little bit from the medical side and on the legal side. Another very, very important side and something that JFF, really tries to honor and provide a lot of services for is our support side. One of the, I mentioned before that we've noticed an increase in interest for surrogacy. And so we had folks that were coming to us wanting a support group. And so we try to answer the call. And so we created a national support group. So all of our national support groups are open to anyone in the United States. And they are free of charge. So we started at the time we thought it was just going to be maybe a pop-up support group, a one-time thing. And it was, I believe, in November, I think, of last year, or October, November of last year. And little did we know that it was not going to be a pop-up group. And it's now May, and we've moved it from an every other month to a monthly support group. I'm very happy and very excited to welcome Charlotte Ramberg. She is a therapist here in Atlanta, and she runs our national support group. She also has her own practice, but also brings a very unique perspective, because not only does she run our national support group and work with clients as well, but she herself has been a surrogate multiple times. And so, Charlotte, thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to give the floor to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Charlotte Ramberg. I am a therapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a 3-time gestational carrier. I'm located in Cumming, Georgia, just about an hour north of Atlanta, and I see clients in my private practice, Cherokee Rose Counseling and Consulting. And I do run the national group for JFF, which is exciting because it has become pretty popular, I would say, and we're proud of that. So today I'm here to talk a little bit about the emotional and psychological experience of surrogacy for both the intended parents and surrogates. We did hear a little bit about the process of screening, so I won't go too in depth with that because it's kind of self-explanatory, but I did want to give voice more towards the deeply human side of this experience, because surrogacy is often framed around logistics, timelines, medical procedures. That's kind of what you hear a lot about. But at its heart, it's an emotional and relational process, and that was mentioned too by Dr. Rubin at the beginning. That at its core, surrogacy is really not a transaction. It's about communication. It's about a relationship, a partnership between the surrogate and the intended parents. So with any meaningful partnership, it's built on trust and it's emotionally layered. So both parties are bringing a great deal of hope, vulnerability, and emotional risk to this, and that is worth paying attention to. So, like it was mentioned before, communication really is key, and it's incredibly important during the matching process to discuss this type of relationship and the communication that everybody's hoping for, because everybody has different ideas of what they want or what that might look like. So the matching process really sets the tone for the entire journey. It's not just about agreeing on medical procedures or protocols or aligning with the expectations, ethical standpoints, things like that. It could also look like, how often do we communicate? Are we texting weekly updates? Will intended parents attend appointments? Is that okay? Are you comfortable with that? And how involved do they really want to be? Some want to be there every time. They're cool with just knowing that the baby's okay. And so again, it's just different based on intended parents and surrogates, personalities alike. And so another thing to think about is what happens if life throws a curveball. If a planned in-person visit becomes a virtual visit due to illness or travel, what happens then? And allowing that flexibility as things change along the way. So in some cases, we have to consider things like sending bump pictures or videos might be triggering for certain IPs, and others really enjoy them. So just being honest up front about those things is super important, and will set a precedent for the comfort level of just what it's like for the rest of the journey. And then often, of course, we overlook the relationship post-delivery, how much communication is going to be there once the baby is born and you have your baby at home. Will the surrogate receive updates or photos? Is there going to be ongoing contact or a natural goodbye? So any of this, all of this can be discussed before the birth to prevent any confusion or emotional pain later, but we do also have to remember things might change along the way. So flexibility is key, along with communication. When it comes to the well-being, the mental well-being, most intended parents come to surrogacy after walking through grief. So this could include miscarriages, failed IVF cycles, medical complications, or situations where carrying a pregnancy was never an option. And there's a myth that once the surrogate is pregnant, the hardest part is over. But emotionally, this can be one of the most tender parts of the journey, and that is worth discussing and noting. So there's a lot of silent grief and even identity loss that people might experience. And maybe you've experienced it before or are currently experiencing, but things might pop up like, I should be able to carry my baby has failed, or my body has failed me, or this just isn't how I imagined parenthood. The should statements are heavy, and they come from various things like societal expectations or internalized stigma, but they don't speak to the truth of your strength, your commitment, or your capacity to love a child no matter how they come to you. You're already making the best choices and decisions for your child even before they're born. And those feelings don't mean that you aren't excited or grateful. It just means that you're human. IPs often have to go through this experience of coming to terms with or letting go of a lot of aspects along the journey that most people don't think about having to even consider. Not many people fantasize about infertility or IVF when imagining expanding their family. That's just not the reality that we're anticipating. So for some, of course, yes, they may have known all along that this was probably the only option that they've had for a biological child. My first set of IPs were two men, and they knew that from the beginning, and that regardless though of that scenario, the mental health component shouldn't be taken lightly. It's common to experience emotional triggers throughout the pregnancy, and that's something that needs to be discussed. Having that mental health support is very important. If you've gone through IVF before, seeing someone else go through the process, even if it's successful, it can bring up a lot of complicated emotions. You may feel grief, jealousy, guilt, even disconnection. And it's common to experience a hesitation to bond, especially if there's been a previous loss. Hoping is pretty difficult. So some would describe this as kind of like a protective numbness of I don't want to get too attached yet, and that's okay. Excitement can feel unsafe. Love can feel risky at this point, and we need to be able to normalize that. So when baby is born, there may be fears then around bonding post-birth of, will my baby know me? Will it feel different because I didn't carry them? And I want to emphasize that bonding is a relationship. It's not a role. It builds through presence, not biology. Even though I know most people we hear about, you think of, okay, well, they are biologically related, but if you have donor egg or sperm, you may not be. And so those are some things that people are really worried about, and it's important to be able to discuss. So one of the most common fears for intended parents is, how will I bond if I didn't carry the baby? And it is a valid concern, but the truth is that bonding doesn't start and stop with pregnancy. Bonding is built throughout this entire process with presence, intention, and love. And there's things that you can do from day one. So there are ways to build connection before birth. You can record yourself reading or singing and have your surrogate play it. You can write a letter to your baby and ask the surrogate to read it. You can journal your thoughts and hopes as baby grows. One really cool example that I've heard recently comes from technology, and there's this watch that long distance couples have used. And if you tap it, you can feel the vibration on the other person who's wearing the other watch. And so if you want to schedule an hour, a day kind of thing where that the surrogate's going to do kick counts, she can just sit there and tap every time she feels the baby move, and you'll feel your watch vibrate too. And so it's just a way to kind of tap in emotionally. You can pause, you can sit and breathe and just picture your baby, journal or talk to them in that moment. But that mental and emotional engagement is bonding. My last set of IPs actually recorded readings of their favorite books, and they had a little girl that also helped participate. So I just had those little belly buds headphone adapters where you just kind of stick them on your pants, and the sound just gets projected right into the womb. So it can be private. The surrogate doesn't have to hear what you're saying or singing to the baby. Post-birth bonding, of course, is very powerful as well. Skin to skin, rooming in with baby, all of that stuff. It all helps with bonding. Another thing that comes up is the surrogate side of psychological screening and what all that entails. I know we kind of discussed that a little bit earlier, but it's a pretty thorough screening. I've been through it a lot. You do a psychological evaluation, so you have to take the personality test, you have to answer questions about motivation, about what your support system looks like, all that fun stuff. So we aren't just checking mental health history. Do you have any prior diagnoses, medication history? We're checking that motivation, making sure the surrogate has healthy boundaries and a strong support system, and a really clear understanding of what her role is in this process. So there's a lot of preparation for surrogates as well. There's a common question that people often ask, won't you get attached? How can you give up a baby? And it kills me when people ask me that, like, how can you give up the baby? But my answer to that is always, well, yeah, I mean, we form a connection, but it's not a parental identity or a parental bond. We're holding space, but we don't hold on to that, if that makes sense. It's similar to how a NICU nurse or a loving caregiver might care deeply for a child, but also knowing it's not their child. We're caretakers for a short but sacred season. So, most surrogates come to surrogacy after completing their own families, and the motivation behind carrying is typically rooted in a deep desire to help. Many of us just love pregnancy. not the first trimester, because that's awful always. But we want to share that gift of pregnancy, of parenthood. And so the desire to help families and build that lasting bond, oftentimes it's more so we're looking for the relationship with the IPs, not necessarily the baby. But it's an added bonus if we get to be in the baby's lives too, because they're just super cute and squishy, and we love that. But of course, along this, that doesn't mean that we're immune to emotional complexity. So, we grieve too when a failed transfer happens, when a cycle is canceled, when a heartbeat is no longer found. Sometimes we often grieve alone because others assume, oh, well, it wasn't your baby, so it's not the same, which it's not the same, but it was still a baby. We carried that hope too with you, sometimes for you, if that hope doesn't feel possible at the moment. And after birth too, we experience postpartum hormonal shifts, even though we're not bringing a baby home. The drop in hormones is still real. It's still happening. The body doesn't know that that baby wasn't ours. And so surrogates need support too, even if they say, oh, I'm fine. It's just something to continually talk about with both parents and surrogates. So both of us, both parties and sides can benefit from support systems. So not just during the medical journey, but afterwards. And at JFF and beyond, support is essential. So, I mean, no one should walk this path alone. And that's why I'm very excited about the national support group. It's on the JFF's national site. It's called the Surrogacy/GC support, and it is monthly, and I'm super excited that it's monthly. We really are just there to offer a safe space for intended parents to talk openly. So we get to discuss all the messy parts of this journey, the grief, the anxiety, the what ifs, the longing. I mean, we've got people who are just starting the journey to people who are nearing birth. And so it's a wide variety of people who get to come in and help just say me too. And that's probably one of the most healing things of all. It's providing that solidarity in what sometimes feels like a very lonely process. So aside from that, taking the therapy hat off, I'd love to tell you about my personal experience as a gestational carrier. I've worked with 3 families so far, resulting in 2 live births. So it was a live birth in 2021. I worked with another family that unfortunately it didn't work out after 3 transfers. And then the last one, the baby just turned a year old last March, or this past March. So this was in 2024 that she was born. And yeah, each time it was humbling, emotional, full of meaning. And I've always been fascinated with perinatal mental health. And I was introduced to this organization called Postpartum Support International early on in my career. I did my certification training for perinatal mental health and happened to get paired with a client of mine who was a mom who spoke about being a surrogate. And mind you, this was prior to my own children being born. And so that kind of just got tucked away quietly. And it stuck with me. It settled in on my heart. And during COVID, I finally took the time to research more and came across an agency called Family Makers, which an agency is amazing and makes all of the medical and legal stuff less complicated for, for everybody involved. But from there, everything fell into place and the rest is history. So as a surrogate, I personally never felt like the baby's mom. I didn't feel like, this was my child, and I wasn't overly connected in any way because I knew that this was somebody else's baby, and I got to be that bridge for them. I got to keep the baby safe. I gave updates. I celebrated milestones with the intended parents along the way. There were emotional moments like feeling a kick and knowing that someone else would one day meet that little person, seeing a negative pregnancy test or an empty gestational sac, or seeing the joy and the tears on parents' faces when they get to hold their baby for the first time. It gives me goosebumps even talking about it now, and it's been at least over, a year since the last one was born. But that makes all of this, every injection, every appointment, every emotion worth it. I never felt like I was giving a baby away. I always felt like I was giving a family their baby back. And that's what surrogacy is. The mental health component here is just so important with that relationship and understanding the emotions that come with it. And the exciting news is I'm on my 4th journey currently, and I will be transferring hopefully in mid-June. My baseline appointment is tomorrow. So we're really excited about that. But yeah, so basically if you're considering intended parent or a surrogate, there are support groups out there and we can chat about mental health. So that's what I've got for you.
Charlotte, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You definitely bring a very unique perspective to the table. So thank you. We are gonna keep moving along that support side. We love when we have our personal impact stories, and so I'm really excited to introduce Chloe, who is going to speak to us as a veteran of surrogacy. So while we just heard Charlotte speaking on what it was like to be a surrogate, Chloe's going to speak on the intended parent side of what it was like for her on that journey. Thank you for being here, Chloe.
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe. So I used 2 surrogates. One was 3 years ago because I have a 3-year-old son now. And the other was 2 years ago. I have a beautiful daughter who's now 2 years old, and they are actually 9 months apart. So I ended up using 2 different surrogates, and at some point they overlapped. And it was honestly an amazing journey. I went into it with sort of the same concerns that Charlotte highlighted, which were, this feels so weird. Someone else is carrying my baby. This sucks. Like, me and my husband won't have that bond, that like experience of being pregnant, and he's not going to take care of me. And what a shame. And then had really hard time getting pregnant myself. And as hard as I tried, it was like more emotional and devastating to keep trying myself than to just relinquish control and experience what it's like to use a surrogate. And I think, again, Charlotte made a really good point that this is a relationship that you'll never experience with anyone else. Like, it's that weird that it's almost cool. And so I sort of went into surrogacy with that mentality. Like, how can I really take advantage of this? Like, this is so wild. Someone else carrying my baby at the same time, I have a full-time job. So I was like, you know what? It's kind of nice that I'm not going to have the brain fog and the nausea and all that stuff that comes with being pregnant. Like, this is actually a really great way to have the best of both worlds. I get to have my biological baby, and I get to, work with someone who's going to give me that baby. And is so generous and, kind. Like, wow. So that was sort of how I went into it. I think the other challenge, which you didn't bring up, but I do think I had, and I know that a lot of women have, because I talked to a lot of women who are considering surrogacy, is like, well, how do you know what these women are going to eat and how they're going to exercise? And like, you care so much about being so health conscious yourself. How do you know how they're going to live their lives? Are they just going to smoke cigarettes? Are they going to drink alcohol? Are they going to eat a cheeseburger from McDonald's? Like, what are they going to do? And I think that if you're going to choose surrogacy, it's like, you have to go in with the mentality of, I am not in control. And that's okay. Like, you tried to control every single thing you possibly could have, right? Like IVF, there's no greater like science that you could have leveraged to try to have a baby, and it didn't work. And so at a certain point, it's almost like a relief to let that control go and say, this is out of my hands. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. This woman has had more success getting pregnant than I ever will. So let her do her thing, and she will be successful. And so that's how I went into it. Like, I never asked her what she ate. I never asked her if she was walking every day or exercising. I never asked her anything. I just sent her gifts. I made her feel like this was going to be the best experience she could ever have. And I wanted her to really enjoy it because hopefully if we did have a successful live birth, I wanted her to do it again. And then it was a great experience. We went to visit her and her family. We spoiled her kids with toys. We like tried to do whatever we can to like really lighten the experience. And at the same time, we tried to not make it feel forced. Like, I never set any expectation that we were going to call each other every week or text. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be incredibly organic. And it was. And after the birth, or actually I'll spend a little bit of time on the birth. The birth was wild. Like all four of us were in the room. Me, my husband, her and her husband. It was like I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like, how can I help? Like, what do you want me to do? Should I put on some music? Like, but it was great. And it was great. There's nothing really much to say. After the baby was born, it was like so clear that the baby was going to be put in my on my chest, and we were going to do skin to skin. She didn't like ask to see the baby, or there was no awkwardness. Like it was just so clear. She was so happy for us. We were in the room together for a little bit, and then we ended up having our own room. That also depends on the hospital. The other hospital that we did was not as straightforward, but it worked out in the end. And yeah, I think ultimately for me, like the best thing was relinquishing control, and with that sort of seeing the silver lining, which is like, I actually don't have to go to every single doctor's appointment if I don't want to, like if I'm busy and I've got something else going on, I can FaceTime in and be like, how'd it go? Like all good, and I think that you have to find your balance. And again, like so many women respond to it differently. I took one extreme. You can really sort of create your own path. And I think that's also what's so beautiful about that relationship with your surrogate. Like you can define what you want to do and how you feel comfortable. And obviously it's a decision with your partner, but yeah, I think there's so many ways to play it.
Amazing. Chloe, thank you so much. And you may have noticed lots of smiles coming from Monica as soon as Chloe started talking. That would probably be because that is her mother-in-law. And so Chloe, as she's talking about her grandchildren, Monica was probably very excited. But anyways, our next speaker is Monica. She joins us from South Florida. Well, I don't know if you're actually in South Florida right now, but she lives in South Florida, one of our newer JFF locations that just opened up last year. Monica, thank you so much for being here. She is going to provide us with just a little bit of what it was like to be what we call a grandparent veteran. So she is, like I said, Chloe's mother-in-law. So she's going to speak on just the perspective of being a intended grandparent at the time for someone going through surrogacy. Thank you, Monica, for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Chloe, for giving me my grandchildren. And yeah, I do smile every time she speaks, or she speaks about the two kids, because they are a treasure. First, Charlotte, I mean, like, I'm in awe. For me, anybody who offers themselves to be surrogate, like, you guys are the most generous people. You give of yourself, of your body, of your family. Like, to me, there's not enough thank you, which is why I'm involved with JFF. Look, I think that when you have kids, you kind of assume that they're going to grow up, they're going to go to college, they're going to work, they're going to get married, they're going to have kids. Like, you kind of, we're just, or maybe I was, because I'm very naive. And thank God my son did that. Went to college, met Chloe day one, and they've had like this incredible romance that I hope lasts forever. But then things weren't quite as easy, and they struggled very much to have children. And as a parent, to see your children suffer in that way, and see the pain and the disappointment and the struggle, and then suffer through the decision of going into surrogacy, and suffer through first IVF and the losses and the broken dreams, is incredibly difficult, because it's their process, it's their journey, and you have to let them do it. And yet you're on the sidelines, but as a parent, you suffer alongside with them. And maybe, or not, I've never discussed this with Chloe's mom, to be perfectly honest, but I'm on the guy's side. So it's even like it's her pain, and really physically, emotionally, the hormones are hers. And so you've got to be there, but you can't be there. So like, and you have to give them their space. So, when you have the miracle of surrogacy, first there's a miracle of IVF, which is incredible and so amazing that you can try and get those eggs and those embryos and test them and make sure you can hopefully choose the best ones and all of that. That in itself is a miracle. And then when you have the generosity of people like Charlotte and the miracle of medicine, that I can speak with these two little children, although I live in Florida, thank God Chloe allows me to, but I speak to them practically every day on FaceTime and see them quite a lot. It's it's a miracle. It's a miracle, and all children are miracles, but children out of surrogacy are triple miracles. So I have nothing but gratitude to the process, to the medicine, and to my to Isaac and Chloe that were able to go through it and had the maturity and the courage to do it, because I don't think it's easy decisions. I think, you go through, everybody's like, at their age, when are you having kids? You're not pregnant. How come? Like, it's very hard. There's a lot of pressure. And I think that it's awesome the way they did it. I have incredible respect and gratitude for what they've done. And I just hope that I can go along for the ride and be supportive as much as I can. And I hope that's what I wish for anybody who's going through it, and just keep the faith that it happens.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you to all of you. It's really amazing, all the different everything that you bring to the table, and I hope that all the attendees also appreciate it. I'm gonna move it to our Q&A right now. Got a couple questions that have come in, so thank you so much. If you have any, we will try to get to all of them. I'll do my very best, but I did just want to mention that Charlotte, like we said, does run our national support group. If you are interested, it is free of charge. You will receive a post-event email tomorrow. There is a link to sign up if you are interested. And we do have our fertility buddy program, also free of charge, open to anyone in the United States, for folks who are either on a surrogacy journey, or if you are a veteran of surrogacy, would love to have you as part of our program. It's a short 30 to 45-minute virtual training, and you could help other folks that are going through themselves. So all of that information will be on there on the email tomorrow. So, all right, I'm gonna open it up to Q&A. So it looks like Rachel, a question for you. If your surrogate is in a state with strict abortion laws, how do you handle those contracts? Can you put decisions around termination in a contract? If not, is it something the IPs and surrogate have to verbally agree on? And if there are any protections the IP can have or should just avoid working with the surrogate in a state with strict abortion laws? Sorry, that was a lot to unpack.
No,
So
no,
I
that's
can
great.
break it down.
And it's a great question, and especially after Dobbs came down, which overturned Roe v. Wade, which was the right to have a abortion. We were asking these same things. I mean, there were attorneys in states where abortion was legal saying don't work in states anymore where abortion is not legal. We have the benefit of several years now of just practice, but also no crystal ball. And so here's what I would say. Fortunately, while we have to deal with the termination conversation, and it is a very important one, I don't know that I would let it drive the surrogacy ship. There are a lot of different components to a surrogacy, and the vast majority of surrogacies, although it happens, do not need a selective reduction or termination. Dr. Rubin can speak to also some of the testing that can be done on the embryos so that you can know a little bit more even going into the pregnancy. When you have a state that limits it, there are workarounds, and it's going to be state dependent. But a workaround that we see a lot is the surrogate would travel to another state in order to get the termination. And to my knowledge, there is no state that can prohibit travel to another state to get a termination in a constitutional way. Again, no crystal ball. The other couple things I would say on this point is the mental health piece is so important, because even if the law is permitted, if she's not willing, I truly don't know that a court would make her get a termination if she doesn't want to. She has body autonomy. And also, look, we don't know what's going to happen on a federal level. Right now, we've got this patchwork of states. Some have no abortion, some are very permissive of abortion. Then there's everything in between. We could have a federal law about abortion, and it could be a moot point. So I don't know that I would drive the surrogacy ship on the termination question. I would speak to counsel in those states. I would speak to counsel, I think it was Florida. There are many, many, many attorneys who do surrogacy successfully in Florida. There's a great resource out there called the Academy of Adoption and Assistive Reproductive Technology Attorneys. These are all attorneys who have had a minimum number of cases. Like I think you have to have 50 to get in. You have to be vetted by your peers, their recommendation letters. People have to know who you are. This has to be a big part of your practice. So it's a great resource for attorneys who are really, really experienced in art. And they have a state-by-state directory. So if you're wondering, like, who should I reach out to? That's a great resource. You are welcome to reach out to me too, whoever Anonymous is. And I can give you a couple attorney names in Florida. And we actually have some affiliated with JFF as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Dr. Rubin, this next one is for you. The question is that they've bumped heads with their many GCs not being COVID vaccinated against COVID. Medically, how important is the COVID vaccine currently today?
Oh, that's a tricky one. So I think it depends on your personal preference. Certainly some IPs are doing COVID vaccines for themselves and others are not. I think when deciding if it's important or not, you should think about how important it is for you to be vaccinated. And some of it with the GC getting vaccinated is not just so the GC doesn't get COVID, but it's so that the GC is passing passive immunity down to the baby. And so a lot of the immunity is really important for the baby early on, especially if the baby is born during the fall or the winter when COVID tends to be higher. So it's really a very personal question. Most fertility clinics do not mandate a COVID vaccine for gestational carriers. There were some that did when COVID first came out. But most clinics, I believe, do not mandate it now. But it's got to be something that the GC and the IPs feel comfortable with. I think COVID vaccine is definitely controversial. As a medical provider, I think it's important. As an intended parent, I had both of my gestational carriers. They agreed, and we had talked about it, but they vaccinated so that there was immunity for the baby. But I think it also is a bigger question too of if they don't feel comfortable with a COVID vaccine and you're okay with that, that's not the only vaccine that's recommended during pregnancy. And so COVID vaccine is the one that people often talk about, but flu vaccine is very important in pregnancy. Women who are pregnant that get the flu have a higher risk of miscarriage, preterm labor, intrauterine fetal demise, meaning babies born that aren't viable, as well as maternal death. So the flu vaccine is another really important one. And then also, before women get pregnant, they should be screened to make sure they're immune to chickenpox as well as rubella. Those are two live virus vaccines that if the gestational carrier is not immune, she should be vaccinated before pregnancy, just like any woman who's going through IVF and doing embryo transfers. And so I think there are several vaccines that are important during the course of the antepartum period and throughout the pregnancy that it's important for the IPs and the gestational carrier to have a discussion. And if there's any hesitation with vaccines, it needs to be very clear which vaccines they want to do, which ones they don't, and to make sure that everybody's aligned.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. This one may be more kind of a general, Chloe, maybe you or Jesse or Dr. Rubin can answer this one. There are an overwhelming number of matching programs out there. How can intended parents begin to find the right one for them? Suggestions for how to approach this? I don't know if one of you want to take that or
I'll start, I guess. So this is about gestational carrier agencies.
Matching, right, so matching programs.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
So I get asked this actually a lot. And I think one of the most important things when trying to figure it out is to determine if it's important that you have a gestational carrier that's local to you or not local. And some of the agencies will only work with local surrogacies or local surrogates. So, for example, they'll work with maybe your state and maybe a neighboring state or two. Whereas other agencies, if I lived in Atlanta, they could match me with somebody in California. And so I think the first thing to kind of do is think about how involved you want to be in the process. And Chloe did a really good job of talking about it, where some people want to be at absolutely every appointment, and other intended parents don't necessarily want to be at every appointment. And some people want to be somewhere in the middle. So I think figuring out how important it is for you to be at those appointments is going to determine if you need somebody who's local or not. The other thing that often we'll mention is if you have somebody who's not local, understanding that you can't control when they deliver. So if you want to be there for the birth, you're either going to have to be around that area around the time that she's, close to delivery, or you very well might miss the delivery. And how important is it for you to be there? And can you jump in the car, or do you have to get on a flight? And so I think figuring out, do you want somebody local or not is a really good way to kind of start. Also, most fertility clinics will give you a list of gestational carrier agencies. At our practice, we give people a list of agencies, and they have to use either an agency on the list or bring that name to us, so that we can approve it as an approved agency. So if you go and Google gestational carrier agencies, you're going to find so many hits online on Google, it's going to be impossible to sort through. But I think reaching out to your local fertility clinic and figuring out which agencies they work with and who they already have a relationship with is a really good starting point, and it saves you a lot of time and effort trying to look through online.
I would also just add that different agencies have different timelines and wait lists. So that's one question to ask. They charge differently. So like if, money isn't a factor, like knowing what their rates are. And then the third thing would be like, how involved are they throughout the whole process? Like, how much are they going to handhold you? How much are they going to follow up with the surrogate to make sure that she's going to the doctor's appointments and following up with recaps and, staying on top of it? I worked with two different agencies and they had very different approaches. One was like so cookie cutter factory like, but it was great because they were super organized and nothing fell through the cracks. And the other one was much more like boutique, but they were way less involved throughout. So, you kind of want to ask that too.
And I'll add just from my perspective, because I work with hundreds of different matching programs. Anybody can start a matching program. There's, with some exception, New York State, very little, if any, regulation about these programs. And so you have fantastic programs and you have not fantastic programs. And so I would want to ask about experience. I would look on the surrogacy Facebook groups for other people's experience with them. You have to take everything you see online with a grain of salt, but if you're seeing the same thing over and over and over again, you might want to ask about it. And I would really dig into Chloe's point about what exactly are they providing and what do you need? Are you really truly looking for them because you need a match, or do you need somebody to hold your hand the whole way through? There's nothing wrong with either of those options. It's really about knowing yourself. I do think that there can be a level of protection for the surrogates with working with a matching program, but also not always. I mean, there are some just really cruddy matching programs out there. So you need to be aware of that. For folks who don't use a matching program because it's cost prohibitive, or maybe they already have a surrogate who's a friend or a relative, and it doesn't really make sense necessarily for them to use it. I mean, I do work with people who do what we call independent matches, and then they really have to be willing and able to take on the heavy lifting themselves. That said, I mean, from my perspective, the contract really lays out exactly what you need to do. You need to look at insurance, you need to have the doctors, you need to consider all these things. You need to have escrow. Also, if it's not somebody you're going to need to be going through the background check. I think that is a piece that matching programs that are good do a really good job of, is background checking, and not just talking about the surrogate, intended parents also. I mean, as a surrogate, you want to know that the person that you're working with is a good person. And so there's a lot of important pieces that matching programs can bring to the table, but it's also just, as surrogacy is one path to parenthood, a matching program is one way to do surrogacy.
And I would just add that if you are already established with a fertility physician and you already have embryos created, before you sign on with a matching program, make sure you run it by your fertility provider to make sure that it's a company and matching company that they're willing to work with. Most fertility clinics will have certain places that are not on our list because there have been bad experiences. So that can sometimes save you the financial burden and heartache of matching with a program that maybe is not ideal. But just make sure to check with that fertility physician before you sign up.
All right. For the interest of time, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, or I think we'll ask one or two more questions. Rachel, how long on average does the contract development / negotiation process take?
So here's what I tell my clients. Once I am retained and we have payment and I have all the information that I need to draft, I always aim to turn around a draft in a week. And then the process can take between 4 and 6 weeks. That's an average. I've had it go slower, I've had it go faster. There's a lot of people involved, there's a lot of schedules involved. It's not just me at that point, it's my clients, it's the carrier, it's her attorney. So average 4 to 6 weeks, but it depends on availability, it depends on motivation. Frankly, it depends on how many things we are negotiating, and that's not something you can know until you really get into it.
Perfect. Thank you. Dr. Rubin asked, their prospective GC has 2 children in their teens. Is there any benefit to having a GC who had children more recently, or does it not make a difference? Obviously, assuming she passes her medical tests and her doctor approves of her obstetrical records.
Depends. It depends how old she is. So most fertility clinics and most fertility physicians will have a cutoff of how old the gestational carrier can be. And so it depends on how old the woman is. There is not a set cutoff that's standardized across clinics. Some clinics use the age of 40, some use the age of 42, 43. The reason that you worry about age is that as women are over the age of 35 and they're pregnant, their risk of high blood pressure during pregnancy, gestational diabetes, preterm labor, and adverse fetal outcomes increase. So most people prefer a surrogate on the younger side, and not in their mid 40s, certainly not in their late 40s. But I do have several patients that have used surrogates that are over 35 and have still had good outcomes. And that's part of why we do such a good medical screening on them, is to make sure that there's no underlying medical conditions. But check with the clinic, because depending on her age, there's probably a cutoff.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, let me just look here. All right, Charlotte, question for you. How can intended parents support their surrogate emotionally during the pregnancy?
That's a wonderful question, and it honestly depends on who the surrogate is. Trying to give a blanket answer for that's very difficult, because for some carriers, they love just getting to have that natural relationship and very organic friendship, and that's all they need. If they can talk to you and feel comfortable then great. Other carriers are more, I mean, really look at their love language. I think that's going to be the biggest tip is what's their love language? How do they accept love or want to be loved and appreciated? And that's probably the best way to go about it.
Amazing. Thank you. So we unfortunately are out of time. I wanted to a very, 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 very big thank you to all of our panelists. I am in awe of all of the wonderful things you had to say today. I hope that you all also found this helpful in your journeys, whether you are coming to us as people who are already on a journey, just starting on a journey, intended grandparents, families of loved ones, wherever you are in your journey. We appreciate you being here. We will be sending out a post-event email tomorrow with some information on how you can find more information on what we can offer. A huge thank you again to our wonderful panelists. And for any other questions, please feel free to contact me at JFF. You should have my email address, and wishing you all a very good evening. And thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.